Good morning, all. This is John Heerdink at Tribe Public. I'm so happy to have you all join us today. I have with me Dr. Quay, CEO and founder of Atossa Therapeutics in Seattle, symbol on the NASDAQ ATOS, and CFO Kyle Guse, if I could, or Guse, sorry, Kyle. Very proud to have the both of you gentlemen to join us today. Last time we had you guys on the program was July 30th, so we're great to get and happy to get a quick update here today and enjoy your presentation. Quick reminder to all the tribe that have joined, you may ask questions at the end of the presentation. Please send those questions if you already haven't through the chat feature at Zoom here, and we'll do our best to get those questions addressed. We're still fighting the COVID-19 coronavirus situation. Atossa and Dr. Quay and Kyle are fighting the fight. Looking forward to get to see what you had to say. And one other reminder, I'm going to be giving away 100 copies to those that want them of Dr. Quay's great bestseller book, Stay Safe. And how a physician's guide to surviving coronavirus. A very good book, a great read, and I found it to be, it set my mind at ease. It's a very practical, somewhat funny look at this, and it brings you down to earth if you're at all stressed about the situation like many of us are. So thank you for writing that book, Dr. Quay, and I look forward to getting that out to everyone. So if you would, without further ado, please start your presentation and we'll go from there.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. I'll go ahead and start our presentation here.
All right.
If for some reason people can't see it on their screen, it's also on our website, and I'll be calling out the slide numbers as we go through this so you can follow along a little more easily. And this is, by the way, Kyle Guse speaking right now, and then I'll go through the first few slides and then turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, Kyle.
So first, we are an SEC reporting company. So I encourage everyone to read our SEC reports before making an investment in Atossa Therapeutics. We're a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on two significant health needs. One is breast cancer and the other is COVID-19. On the breast cancer side, we recently reported positive phase 2 results from one of our programs, and we have two programs in the breast health space. One is a phase 2 study that's underway in breast cancer, and the other is a phase 2 study treating breast density and or acting as an adjuvant to mammography, and that's planned to start this quarter. So those are our two breast cancer programs. And then we have two programs on the COVID-19 side. Similarly, one to treat patients who were ill with COVID-19, severely ill, and another earlier in the disease progression called AT301, which is a nasal spray. And for that program, we have a phase 1 underway, which we're going to finish enrolling and dosing here in this quarter. So news coming up on that program. Slide 4. A reminder of our executive team here. The company is led by Dr. Quay. He's a Ph.D. and an M.D. His Ph.D. is in chemistry. He did postdoc work in the lab of a Nobel Prize winner at MIT. He did his residency at Mass General and taught at Stanford for almost a decade, and then went on to start a series of companies. He's invented 7 FDA-approved drugs. Importantly, including 2 that are nasal spray products. And we'll be talking more about our COVID-19 nasal spray product as we go along here. I spent most of my career doing capital markets and M&A work for biotech companies down in Silicon Valley. And Dr. Frazier recently joined us, heading up our clinical, regulatory, and CMC work. She has over 20 years of experience. Slide 5 here is just sort of a broad corporate overview. As of June 30, we have no debt. As of June 30, we had $7.6 million in cash, but we also raised an additional $4.3 million in cash in July. To put things in perspective, we're typically burning $700,000 a month to $1 million a month. So that's upwards of a year's worth of cash that we have on our balance sheet. Our market cap as of October 9 is about $43 million, fully diluted, and we're based in Seattle, Washington. Our clinical development pipeline on slide 6 here, this is just sort of a reminder of the 4 programs, 2 in COVID-19, one of which is in a phase 1 clinical study, and 2 programs on the breast health side. One is in a phase 2 study, and the other is about to start a phase 2 study here this quarter. It almost goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. We're dealing with very large market opportunities here. A reminder of the COVID-19 death count here, over 1 million deaths attributed to COVID-19. The actual number might be larger, but those are the reported numbers. Many of those patients go on a ventilator before they pass away. And so our ATH-201 is for these severely ill patients. We now have over 37 million COVID-19 cases worldwide. Our AT301 nasal spray program is really more for the less severely ill patients that would go home and deal with the disease at home. And as a reminder, there are no FDA-approved therapies and certainly no FDA-approved vaccines for COVID-19. And finally, on the breast cancer side, again, big markets, 39 million women every year have mammograms in the United States, and get reports that say that about 10 million of those women have high breast density. And Dr. Quay will be talking about more about that in a second. Then finally, about 200,000 cases of ER-positive breast cancer in the United States every year, and that's the most common type of breast cancer is ER-positive. Our development strategy, just a couple of things I want to highlight here. I'm not going to go through this in great detail. One is that we are seeking partners for all of our programs. We don't plan on getting all the way to the finish line on our own. And by partner, I mean a partner that would provide capital to do larger clinical studies. And in return, we would give that partner some marketing rights for some specific geography. The plan on the AT301 nasal spray side, just to highlight that column, is that we'll finish our phase 1 study here this quarter, and we'll find a partner, most likely targeting a testing company. You've all heard about these PCR tests, the quick tests, and so they would be an ideal partner for us because people typically have a test before they're diagnosed with COVID-19. We'll also seek a large-scale manufacturer for these nasal spray devices. We'll go on to pivotal studies, we get regulatory approval or emergency authorization, and then we would start to launch the product. And so with that, why don't I turn it over to you, Steve, and I'll go on to slide 9 here.
Thanks, Kyle and John again. So just a quick reminder on the progression stages of COVID-19. It almost always begins in the nasal cavity. Takes a couple days there to reproduce, to build the numbers. And then during that process, it's being inhaled sort of continuously until finally you get to stage 2, which is days 3 to 10, where it ends up in the lungs as a pneumonia. And so you see it on x-ray, the patient has symptoms of a pneumonia. And then if you don't stop it there, you need to support them for ventilation or else they die in short terms. But it also begins to go into the body and affect the brain, heart, liver, kidney, vascular system. So stopping it early is really, really important. Now, its affinity for the nose has always been well understood, but since the last time we talked, I was speaking with an FDA individual, and they were reporting on a very interesting study, which hasn't been published, but I think to me is the most telling piece of information about the affinity this has for the nasal mucosa. If you give SARS-CoV-2 to monkeys in experimental conditions intravenously, so it goes throughout their circulation, everywhere in their body, they eventually clear it pretty well. Their immune system attacks it, but the one place they get it most intensely is the nasal mucosa. So whether you go in through the air or you go in through the vascular system, the nasal mucosa is where it really likes to spend a lot of time. And so that's been a very important focus for us in developing nasal sprays. Next slide, Kyle. So if you overlay the 3 stages of the disease, in the nose, in the lungs, and in the body, and look at sort of the patterns of contacts with the medical doctors and hospitals and things, you see 4 touch points that are important. So one is that patient who's just been diagnosed. They've either had a quick test or a PCR test, but they're within the first 72 hours of their diagnosis. The nasal spray is intended to do two things in that space. One is, of course, to treat the patient themselves, to try to reduce. So every time the virus cycles, it cycles about every 8 hours, every 10 hours. So it goes into a cell and then it bursts and then it goes into the neighboring cells. When it bursts, we want this nasal spray to prevent it from going into neighboring cells. So that's the real function in the patient who tests positive. But one of the remarkable things we know about is that when a patient gets positive and they go indoors with other adults in their home and or residential environment, they give it to the other members of the family, and that really is one of the core teachings about how this spreads so quickly. And so treating the people who don't have a disease in a preventive mode is a very attractive opportunity. And of course, the clinical trial design, I think I've just spoken about if you put together what I've just said. So in a situation where you have an adult, they've been newly diagnosed, and they have a residential partner who's also an adult, we're going to propose doing a combination trial where we treat the person with the disease and we try to prevent it in their partner. It's a very economical way of getting two birds with one stone, so to speak. Patients will end up in the hospital. And so the need for systemic treatment as they transition from nasal to pulmonary pneumonias and then into systemic. And then finally, if they do need respiratory support, either as a nebulized a breathing device or actually intubated and requiring a ventilator, our program for treating again, blocking the entry into the pulmonary cells is our inhalation program. Finally, we are looking very carefully in the research mode at this recovery phase. One of the hallmarks of this disease is that even when you recover and you are no longer virus positive, you are not back to normal, especially with respect to pulmonary function. So you should see Atossa going into the space of trying to treat and help people recover more quickly after their disease. So that, in a nutshell, are the 4 therapeutic needs that we see. And we have programs, we want to have programs addressing all of these at some point in time. Next slide. So the 201 program is our program for ventilator support, for pulmonary support. It blocks the virus entry completely getting into cells. It's as good as any vaccine or any of the other drugs that have been tested in that context. Working in the laboratory is not the same as working in humans, so it's necessary to pass those laboratory tests, but it's certainly not sufficient to say that this has efficacy in humans. That's done in clinical trials. And our development path is to move very quickly into this. We are in the process of developing the right clinical strategy to get this into patients as quickly as possible. And we do have provisional patent applications around this to help enhance the commercial value for partners with this program. Next slide. The other program is the 301 nasal spray. I mean, as Kyle mentioned, in one of my prior companies, I invented 2 FDA-approved nasal sprays, one for osteoporosis and one for anemia. And there's some real nuances in the drug delivery area around nasal sprays. There's a bit of art as well as science there, and I'm really glad to bring this experience I have with getting things through the FDA to Atossa for its COVID program. This again will be an outpatient home use. 3 times a day is what we're thinking in terms of the delivery. And as Kyle mentioned, the real part of this is that it'll be tied with a very rapid test, either a quick test on the spot or a 24 to 48 hour test, but something that can take a patient who has some symptoms and show that they're positive. In the clinical trial space, we can show using that test efficacy. And it can also be the paradigm for ultimately going to the market with this program. We are in clinical trials right now in Australia with this program, and we will continue to report as we go through the various stages of that phase 1 trial. Again, we have provisional patent applications filed, and Summit Biosciences in Kentucky is their contract manufacturer. They're doing a great job. They're really a stellar group of folks. They have the same 24/7 mentality around this that we do, and we really appreciate their efforts here. Next slide. So with a vaccine, do we need a therapy? I guess, the simplest point you can make on that is we just saw the President of the United States, a man who's in his 70s and who also perhaps has some associated risk factors, go into the hospital, get treated, and come out of the hospital, and now seems to be virus-free without a vaccine at all. What did the day for him was the therapeutics that were available to him. And so that's why we are so focused on therapeutics. You saw today, for example, two major issues with the vaccine programs. Johnson & Johnson had to halt their program for another serious adverse event, much like AstraZeneca did a couple of weeks ago in the UK. We also saw, for the first time in the US, but it's seen around the world, a patient who has the sort of what I would call the best vaccination possible. They have the disease itself, and yet they get reinfected with the virus downstream after the virus has changed a little bit. So that is about as good as a vaccine could get, and yet we still are seeing reinfection. Now, it's been rare at this point in time, but I was quite disappointed in the report today that the second case with this patient was worse than his first case. In the past, typically the first case has been the worst, and the second has been less bad. So there is always going to be a place for therapeutics. With influenza, which has been with us for decades, the therapeutic market is still a multi-billion-dollar market. Next slide, Kyle. Let's switch to breast cancer because, as you know, we share our time and really a 50-50 effort here in the breast cancer space. It's a major disease for women. This is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. 250,000 women a year are getting diagnosed. This is going to go up because we put breast cancer diagnosis, screening, and treatment on hold during the COVID situation. So we're going to have a burst over the next couple of years of this. But it's a major problem. Next slide, Kyle. So there is a clinical space where the two less common breast cancers, HER2 positive, triple negative, typically African-American women, those two cancers have something that's called neoadjuvant, which is something which you treat a woman literally the day after her diagnosis until she has her definitive surgery and therapy. The one cancer, the most common cancer that doesn't have a drug in that space, is ER-positive cancer. We think that endoxifen is, for the first time, uniquely characterized pharmacologically to treat the cancers in that space. And this is very important because both the woman and the doctor and the surgeon and the radiation therapist, they don't like waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks because cancers typically double in that time frame. They go from 2 millimeters to 4, from 4 millimeters to 8 in the time frame between diagnosis and treatment. So not being able to treat those 200,000 women a year is a medical need that needs to be addressed. We're addressing that with endoxifen because, again, it has some very rapid and powerful actions against this kind of breast cancer that we want to take advantage of. Next slide. So we've actually studied it in that case. In a report about 3 or 4 months ago, we reported a major drop, 74% reduction in the major measurement that's done in this window of 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. It's called Ki-67. It basically is the fraction of cells that are dividing at any point in time. And even with only 6 patients, this was more significant than is needed for getting drugs approved, the p-value of 0.05. Almost all patients had a 50% reduction, and all patients had less than 25% remaining Ki-67. Why is that significant? Because in large studies of 70,000 women, getting the Ki-67 below 25% at the time of surgery predicted that they would not get a recurrence in the years ahead, would not have local recurrence or metastatic disease. So in this very small sample of 6 patients, we saw very strong endpoints. We want to finish this study, gather the data together, and go to the regulators to say, hey, we have a chance to do what you've done with HER2 and triple negative, treat the cancer in that window. Let's do it for ER positive, the major cause of breast cancer. Next slide.
I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes left till we open it to questions. Steve, do you want to talk about breast density and our upcoming study there for a few minutes?
I absolutely will. Let's go to that if you don't mind. So this is an example of the density problem. On the right, you have a dense breast. When you reduce the density in that woman, bingo, this cancer pops up. So one of the challenges for mammograms is they're a great screening test if a woman has low density, but about 10 million women in the US have high density. We know that endoxifen will lower that density and aid in the mammographic process. And that's the trial that, as Kyle said, is beginning this fall. And there are so many moving parts with the clinical trial that we're spending literally half our time on the nuts and bolts of getting this started for our shareholders. Next slide. This shows the other aspect of breast density going from left to right here, low density to high density, is it's independently associated with high breast cancer itself. There's probably a biological mechanism there, but where the stroma, what you're seeing is the whiteness, is actually enhancing the growth of cancers in the epithelial part, the small part of the breast that actually gets breast cancer. So high breast density, 10 million women, it not only blocks the mammogram so you can't find cancers if they're there, and it causes cancers 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road. Next slide.
Yeah, so
Kyle, why don't you talk about the milestones, if you would?
yeah, we have a number of milestones coming up. These are all this year, so this final quarter here. On our COVID H201 study, we are hoping to receive IRB and regulatory approval to commence the study and then actually get it started here at the end of this quarter. On the nasal spray program, we plan to complete enrollment in the study that's underway and then complete dosing in that study as well this quarter. And then finally, we plan to launch the breast density study in Stockholm, Sweden by the end of the quarter. And that'll be a phase 2 clinical study. Those are upcoming milestones. Let me come back off the screen share here and see if there are questions, John.
Yes, guys, thank you so much for the presentation. It's very exciting to hear the progress you're making and hopefully we'll be making. One of the questions we had that was sent in early, we spoke a little bit about, is our President Trump recently had contracted the coronavirus and had taken treatments. Can you speak to what? Can you speak to his situation in any way and how that might tie back to Atossa and what you're doing?
Sure, yeah, a little bit, John. Look, you know, as a physician, it's really inappropriate to really talk too much about a patient. If you don't have the patient record, you can't do a physical exam. And so I really shy away from talking too much about the direct treatment there. I think I did point out the fact that he very early had some supplements and things that can be helpful. Vitamin D deficiencies, for example, have been shown to be related to that. But very quickly went into some of the key therapeutics that are available, which is a cocktail of antibodies to simulate a vaccine, remdesivir to block the virus from replicating, and dexamethasone to suppress the immune system. So if nothing else, it's, I think, a stellar example of where therapeutics are really treating this right now. There's still needs for therapeutics, something that where you don't have to go into the hospital you need to be in a hospital to get remdesivir and to get some of these. So being able to have a nasal spray to take home would be an excellent opportunity here. But you know, I think that's probably what I'd be willing to say about it.
Kyle, is there anything you would add, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, it just, you know, I'm a layperson when it comes to medical stuff, and my observation was, you know, it was not a vaccine that got him out of the hospital; it was therapies, and those therapies are not available to the population at large, whether in a hospital or outside of a hospital. So there is a huge need for other therapies like Atossas that people can take home. You know, regular people that maybe have limited health insurance and don't have access to the type of treatments that the president got.
Thank you. Reminder, Tribe, that those on the webinar here, you can send in your questions via the chat feature as we still have time for some additional questions. A follow-up question that just came in is in regards to your breast cancer program that you just went over, and also, you know, the interview that you did on TEDx Talk, Dr. Quay, that got so many views around the world. I think it was a couple 100,000 plus, if I'm not mistaken. And can you speak to, you know, tie back in one of the things that came up is like, where did the name Atossa come from? Some people haven't seen your speech and before, and maybe you could just can you tie that together why you chose this name?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So Princess Atossa was the wife of Darius the Great. He had the largest piece of real estate before the Roman Empire. He had most of Persia, Middle East area. And she is the first woman in recorded history with breast cancer. It was, according to the written text from her physician, her slave assistant cauterized it with a hot poker. She actually lived through that process, but she is the first recorded woman. Now we found mummies in Egypt from thousands of years earlier than her. She was 454 BC, but I think that of course, being a breast cancer company that we started to prevent breast cancer, we thought we would honor her memory by naming it Atossa Therapeutics.
Thank you. I guess switching back to COVID, I'm not sure which one you want to take this one, Dylan, but there was a mention in the PowerPoint in regards to partnership opportunities, and maybe that is the direction you would take with the nasal spray or what have you. You've already brought into the mix Summit Biosciences. What, I guess, if you could throw up on the whiteboard, if you will, prospective partners in the space with these tests, who are the names that pop up? If you could help us understand that.
I kind of let Kyle focus on business development, so I'll let him take this. I think he's introduced the topic, so why don't you go over the Kyle?
Yeah, I'll probably not mention specific company names, but I will say that for a person to be diagnosed with COVID-19, it typically takes a positive diagnostic test, either a quick test or a PCR test that can take longer to get. So that is the best entry point to introduce our therapy for that patient. If a person receives a positive COVID-19 test, they should be handed a Atossa nasal spray product to take home and take, maybe not just for themselves, but also the other adults that they're living with. There are a number of companies that provide these tests. The perfect partner for us would be one that has the test deployed, if not around the world, certainly in major geographies, and also a company with cash, because that's what they would also bring to Atossa. They would help us finance our studies and finance the commercial development.
Yeah, hopefully speed up the process all the way around.
Exactly.
John, it's also important to mention here that the history now has been that successful therapies and things, the federal government steps in and partners pretty early for some of the initial launches. So that's something that is obviously also going on.
Yeah, I've seen, I guess the NIH stepped in many cases. And so, yes, that would be very interesting. And I would look forward to hearing or seeing that press release someday soon regarding your program. The other question that just came up, let me just make sure I got it straight here, is in regards to the HOPE program that you introduced. Can you speak a little bit more about that and what the combination is that you were going to use in that at the late stage, the final stage, if you will?
Sure. Well, yes. So that is the 201 product, which is a combination of low molecular weight heparin and acetylcysteine. Both of those have interactions with the spike and membrane proteins of the virus, and they also have interactions with the surface of the cells themselves. So they act basically as a chemical vaccine. They actually recognize the same sites that most of the vaccines are targeting, but they target them, chemically, as opposed to with antibodies and immune cells, T cells. So they provide the same protection, as a virus, but they get cleared by the body because they're therapeutics. So they need to be given either continuously or intermittently over days of time. But it's a combination of those two drugs, and we recognized very early in this process in the early part of the first quarter that these would be effective. based on the protein structure of the spike protein, and some of the basic research I did at Stanford. I mean, there's about almost 10,000 people have cited my basic work that I was doing before I started companies. So some of that work actually turned out to be very apropos to what we're doing here with the spike protein. Nature reuses some of these motifs, these protein motifs, and the furin site, the polybasic cleavage site, is reused in the toxin that bees use in their injection, when a bee injection. At one point in time, I was the world's expert on bee venom, so a long time ago.
Well, thanks for your time today. I want to. That's the last question I have on the docket. Wanted to put it back into your court if you'd like to wrap things up and maybe leave us with any thoughts. Remind the tribe too, if you want a copy of this his book, Stay Safe. Please email me or text me, and I'll gift that out to you. And really appreciate it. I would challenge you one step further. As you accept and read this, please take on the challenge to put this in the hands of 10 of your friends, family, etc. And let's spread this book around the world. I truly believe that this is something that it would be good for everyone to read. It's a fairly quick read. I've knocked it out in less than an hour. But as he kept me going throughout it, and it really set my mind at ease. So please take up that challenge. But putting it back to Dr. Quay and Kyle, how would you leave us today?
Well, I mean, I would just mention that the proceeds from the book, John, are all donated to a charitable cause, to a veterans group. So it's a very worthy cause. Those proceeds do not go to Dr. Quay or to Atossa. And I just want to thank everybody for their support, their continued support of Atossa. Look forward to many good things to come.
Yep. Yeah, we've got a busy fall schedule here. I can tell you when I look at my calendar and all the meetings I'm having around our COVID programs and getting those started, and the breast cancer program in Sweden, it's going to be a lot of progress between now and the end of the year.
Well, thank you too for focusing on that and have Atossa pointed squarely to try to solve these two issues. And I really appreciate it. Look forward to having you back soon, and have a great rest of the week. All the best.
Thank you. Appreciate your time, John.